Good evening. I'm Rudy L. Khoury, Dean of the School of Architecture. Thank you for joining us tonight for the Tecnoglass lecture. Let me start first by thanking our sponsors, Tecnoglass. They've been supporting this lecture for 9 years now, allowing us to be able to have the highest, most ambitious level programming, such as a good example, our speaker tonight. So I'm delighted to welcome acclaimed Mexican architect Enrique Norten. Enrique is the founding principal of TEN Arquitectos. Do you pronounce it TEN or TEN? TEN, I presume, is an acronym for Taller Enrique Norten, with offices in Mexico City and New York. His work spans the globe, blending design panache with a deep understanding of urban context. Over the years, Enrique has been recognized with numerous awards for his innovative contributions to architecture and urbanism, including I'm just going to mention just two from a long list: the Smithsonian Institution's Legacy Award and Mexico's National Prize for Arts and Sciences. In addition to this impressive professional career, Enrique has a distinguished academic one. He's taught at institutions like Yale, Harvard, and the University of Pennsylvania, where he actually held a professorship. He's also published extensively, contributing to the discourse on contemporary architecture with articles, lectures, and exhibitions worldwide. He also curated major exhibitions. I was most impressed personally by the one he curated at the Guggenheim Museum. Enrique has a special connection actually to the school and a great presence in Miami, with several completed projects gracing the city and more underway. Miami's dynamic mix of cultures and its ever-evolving urban landscape fits right into his design ethos. Whether it's his projects in Mexico, the US, or beyond, Enrique's work always resonates with the places and people he designs for. And in Miami, that bond, the mutual affinity, is formidable. We're thrilled to have him back with us today. Please join me in welcoming Enrique Norten.
Thank you, Dean L. Khoury. I'm very happy to be back at the University of Miami. It's been a very, very long time. So I do appreciate very much the invitation. And with that, I'm gonna go right ahead into what I have prepared for you. Basically, I've been trying to answer myself. It's sort of questions that keep on coming, on and on and on and on. And after many years of practice and many years of teaching, it's good to sort of to start revisiting what we do. So people ask me all the time, what, from very simple questions like what do architects do, or where is architecture now, or where is architecture going? All of those are questions that have many multiple and different answers. And what I've tried to do is sort of bring together some of the projects that we've done through our career. We've been working as an architect almost 40 years. So it's been quite a long time. We've worked around the world, and trying to bring together and put together some categories with different themes that have remained and have been in our mind for many years, and try to share with you some thoughts about our practice and about the future. I know coming to a university is very special because obviously, there's always huge anxiety in the students as they are sort of coming closer to graduate and sort of trying to understand what they're going to be, what you're all going to be doing, in a few months or in a few years. But anyway, it's a big decision. So what I can say basically is that architecture is a very big field, and there's many, many, many things to do with architecture and for and through architecture for our communities and obviously for the world. So I start with this theme that I have called from the individual and the individual and the collective, or from the individual to the collective. And basically because I believe that, many of us and many of you will be spending a lot of your time working what I first call the individual. And the individual is basically those projects that we do through our life and they never stop, working in all scales and manners, doing sort of like what we would call the residential work. For us, it's been very important and very definitive and very interesting. And we keep on doing because the residential work, or the work we do for those individuals, is the work that has become sort of our place of research, in our place of experimentation, and our place of trying ideas, trying materiality, trying tectonic condition, and learning about what are the possibilities of architecture that then we can take from here into many other aspects of our profession. We keep on working, doing this kind of projects. As a matter of fact, this is a house we're currently about to start building in the state of New York, just outside in New York City. And we keep on doing because there's always a tremendous opportunity of experimentation and research in those, and help us to start defining and creating what we call a vocabulary. Eventually this is where we will start drawing our knowledge and our experience and be able to move forward into other fields of our profession. And from there, obviously, we go, and that's why we call it from the individual and then to the collective. The collective, and I would say, is basically, again, the residential work, or mainly the residential work, but where we're not working already for a person or a couple or a family, but we're working for sort of like an abstract condition of a family. Some of these projects are occupied by 30, by 50, even by 1,500 families in one project. So the scale may be very different, but it always poses some very important and very interesting challenges. And we have been doing also this kind of projects, I would say, around the world, and we keep on doing. And basically, what has been very important to us is to understand how these sort of residential projects, which are the mass, what I call the mass of our cities, is our cities are created by mass and void, and we're responsible for both. But by creating this mass, we also define the void of our city. This is a project we finished a few years in Washington, D.C., and this is a project that you may be aware, also a very large project we finished in New York City, which houses almost 1,000 apartments, and has sort of proposed a new typology for these kind of projects in New York, and a project that we're currently, it's under construction. It started going up in the city of Guadalajara. And the challenge is, what can we do different? Why are these projects important? And why, how can we bring to our, even beyond the collective of the people that live here, bring something new and special and unique to our cities. And by that, I'm going to show you with a little bit more depth a project that we finished in New York City a few years ago in Brooklyn. As a friend of mine says, Brooklyn has become the center of the world for your generation. So we were very lucky to be able to do this project right in the center or in downtown Brooklyn. It's a very interesting project where, as a matter of fact, we worked on this project in this site for about 18 years altogether. Architecture takes a lot of patience. Why? Because we first won some kind of competition. That didn't happen. We were called again, called for another competition on the same site. And then eventually, we won with a big group, this sort of very interesting development that occurred in this very unique and special site in New York City. As you can see, it's a very difficult site, a site with tons of compromises. And the challenge here was that the site belonged to the city of New York, to the city of Brooklyn, as a matter of fact, or the township of Brooklyn. And the city would participate in this development, a public-private development in New York, where the city was giving the site to the developer, and the developer was giving back to the city a third of what he would build in cultural spaces, which was basically the way it was all set together, which I think it's a great way of doing it. We've worked in many of projects like those, and it's a great opportunity, I think, for the future, especially in those cities that either don't have the money or don't want to spend the money on cultural infrastructure or other kind of needed infrastructure. The challenge here was that in order to make this project happen, 6 different cultural institutions were participating in the project. Because of the complexity of the place and the site, we were basically obliged to stack up the different institutions. It wasn't like a campus where every one of the institutions could have a participation with the city. And we believed that the public character of the cultural institutions owned or were deserved, I would say, the opportunity to all be part of the activation of the city. But as we couldn't do it, and what we didn't want to do is do a mall of cultural institutions, meaning one on top of another, connected by elevators or stairs, we decided that we would invent sort of a different kind of a topography that would go back to the city, create a new place for the city, and that would connect all the different cultural institutions. For us, the important thing here was that, yes, we were working on this private development. 400 families were going to live here, 6 cultural institutions, and then a whole bunch of retail stores. There's an Apple store here, a Whole Foods markets in this development, et cetera, et cetera. But the important part is how this development could contribute with new public space to the city of Brooklyn, to the center of Brooklyn. And then we went, obviously, to certain precedents, in this case, the Metropolitan Museum in New York, and more precisely, the Piazza de España in Roma, which you may be all aware, where really it's a public space, it's a square that sort of negotiates different conditions of topography that existed in Rome. In our case, it was a created topography. It was a man-made topography that would allow every one of the institutions to be part of this new public space. The building is now currently finished, and when the people started occupying and energizing at the very beginning the public space. Different activities started occurring. Eventually, it got more and more populated. And these are some photos I took recently. Now the trees are grown, the shadings are there, and it's become really a center, a new urban center, a new public place for the city of Brooklyn that started from doing a residential project. And from there, I must go to the next chapter, which basically I have called public space and architecture. So now I go to a different sort of type of projects that we have been doing in our career. I would say that all of the previous projects are projects where basically have a very strong economic or financial driver. Basically, those are spec projects where people are either doing their own house and investing in their own house, or trying to do some kind of looking for some kind of a return of their investment in much more complex and bigger buildings. But there's a whole other realm of buildings, which are buildings that are not looking for that, and that are really looking to provide a service to our communities, to our cities, et cetera, et cetera. And those are many times buildings that have been commissioned either by different institutions or by different cities, depending on the condition. In this case, this is a courthouse we built in the state of Oaxaca in Mexico many years ago, a building we finished recently for the NASA in Ohio. And these are public buildings. They're not looking for a return. They're looking for a service to fill in a gap in the community or within the society. And the approach or the challenges obviously become very different. In this case, it's what it's called the New York City Taxi and Limousine Commission. It's a building we have now under construction, and it's one of the, I would say, the departments of the city of New York building the same. And here it's a project under construction as well in one of the coast cities of Mexico called Huatulco, which is a large Congress center. But basically, the whole idea was to energize and bring back life to this sort of like boardwalk, this marina, this sort of public place, a place of everybody, a new center within the city of Huatulco that could be enjoyed really by the community, regardless of the activation of the main project itself. So the projects or the programs become sort of like excuses, I would say, but very strong excuses to reactivate and to reorganize and to create new structures for the different towns and cities that are really looking into changing into the future. And I will share with you what I think it's an important project for us, but I think a very appropriate project for what's happening in Miami. We also won in a competition several years ago a project that was that houses the government of the state of Guerrero. Acapulco, as you may have heard, it's one of our important coast cities, an important port. It has an amazingly beautiful bay that unfortunately has suffered a lot lately for natural disasters. But nevertheless, this place or this government building was done way before all of the recent hurricanes that have hit Acapulco. It's located in an amazing place right in the center of the city. This is a photograph of Acapulco before the hurricanes, which I would say, with the exception of the topography, obviously, but it would resemble and bring some thoughts. It's not very dissimilar of what Miami has been or could be, or parts of Miami, and you will see why this project is so important to us. Acapulco being so beautiful, it also suffers, as you all suffer, from these terrible natural conditions. In this case, this is a photo from 1997 from the Paulina hurricane that destroyed partially big parts of Acapulco. So the whole idea of this project was, if we were going to build or design a public building, we really wanted the building to be public. You know, it's dealing with public space in a different manner. What do I mean by that? Most of our buildings, and I was thinking, you know, as I was putting this together, what happened a few years ago in Washington, how the mobs had to go into the Congress Hall in Washington. It was a very non-permeable, very close. Nobody could go into those buildings, you know. And so when we were thinking about this building, I was thinking, you know, it's a state hall, is the place where the governor, all the secretaries, all the offices are here. And how can we make a building that it's really utilized by the public all the time, regardless if they need to come to this building for a certain specific sort of like governmental activity? How would they be able to really utilize this building regardless? It was sort of a very, it's a complex program because basically it's formed by several different departments of different sizes that work at different times. And again, we had the necessity to be able to stack the different uses of this building and define each one of these pieces as a different building in a stacked sort of condition. That was one of the approaches. And the second approach was a very basic and simple approach, saying that, you know, in weathers like Acapulco and probably like Miami that suffer from tremendous heat and tremendous sun exposure during a big time of the year, we would go back to understanding a very simple solution, which we have called a palapa. You know, a palapa is basically a thatched hut that we would cover the whole building with in order to reduce the incidence of sun and to reduce the condition of temperature. All this structure do is create shade. So we would do the same thing in our building, create shade with a very large roof, but we called it a technical palapa. Basically, it's the size of 3 football fields. So you can imagine 3 football fields completely covered by solar panels, which can produce a very important amount of the electricity utilized by the building, but most important, create a lot of shade and reduce the necessity of the use of systems during the hottest times of the year. And the last thing was how to create and make this building really a garden that could be open to the public 24/7, and only the places, the different, I would call them the different boxes where people are working or where people are resolving different sort of special conditions would be closed, but everything else is open. So people would come here, could make a picnic here, could come and have a group conversation, could come and rest, could come and study in the different gardens that could be able to also enjoy the amazing views of the bay from this building. Here's when the building was about to be finished. You can see, well, the heliport, of course, for the governor and his people, but all the solar panels that would produce. Not only it's the energy that is produced by the solar panels, but it's also like a big sort of upside down umbrella that collects the water from the rain, brings the water from the rain to big cisterns, and then that water is recirculated. So we don't need to use also the water directly from the grid. So it's both the creation of energy, but also the reduction of uses of water. That was very important in this case. And here you see some photographs of different stages when the building was almost done. You can see the big palapa covering the different office buildings in within. Only those office buildings are climatized, which reduces enormously the amount of energy that needs to be used for the comfort of the people. And all the terraces is where people just hang out or wait for certain issues that they need to resolve in the different state departments. Some photos of here. The inside is much more transparent once it's produced. The outside is much more solid in order to be able to protect them from the very high winds, and very especially from the hurricanes. I think that the most important thing that happened is that from the beginning, how we presented is that we would present a building that would be both a building and a garden, but would be a very transparent and a very porous building. And what had happened, which is where I think it becomes really important, last year, Hurricane Otis hits Acapulco and really destroys great parts of Acapulco. I was very worried when this happened. It was a number 5 hurricane. You're very knowledgeable about hurricanes here in Miami. This was a number 5 hurricane. Nobody was prepared because the hurricane went from number 1 to number 5 in less than 24 hours. So people were not able to leave, and the destruction was huge. These are just some photos taken after the hurricane that we have collected. But fortunately, nothing happened to our building. And I was very worried. I called one of the secretaries of the state of Guerrero, a friend of mine, and I said, Juan Antonio, how did we do? And he said, Enrique, you won't believe it. It's amazing. Absolutely nothing happened to the building. You know, we lost a couple glass panels, which will be replaced today. We did lose many of the solar panels that flew away that will be replaced. They're already replaced. This is the email he sent me, and he basically said, you know, I don't believe it. We're already working 2 days after, and absolutely nothing happened. So for me, it's been a big lesson, and I think it should be a big lesson for many of places like Miami or like Florida, like Louisiana, like Texas, that are hit by these very important phenomena. And here the whole issue was that by creating a building that would not set up any resistance to the tremendous winds, the winds just went through the building. Yes, we lost vegetation. The vegetation will be replaced. We lost solar panels, but people were again working absolutely normally, basically the next day in this building. And from here, then we go to another thing that I think is very important, and it's as well important to Miami. And I have called it the patrimony. Why the patrimony? I believe that every city in the world has an enormous amount of built stock or built buildings that have enormous value already in our cities. And the value is not always, historical value. Many of our buildings have all kinds of values. In this case, it's a modern building that was transformed into a hotel. The recuperation of a building, or as you call it here in the States, adaptive reuse of a building in New York City that used to be a manufacturing building transformed into a very high-end residential building in New York. In this case, this is a hall built 200 years ago in Mexico City, transformed into a museum, an old movie theater that has been transformed into a cultural center, also in the city of Mexico. And it's not only buildings, but it's already, in this case, a big park that is being transformed into a new important recreation center in the city of Mexico. But with that, I'm going to show you a project which I think makes a lot of sense also for what happens not only in Florida, but anywhere else, which has been the transformation of a set of buildings in the city of Puebla. Puebla is a beautiful city, a couple hours is east of Mexico City. I always say it's one of the hidden treasures or the best kept secrets in Mexico. It's a very beautiful city. And we were invited, or we won another competition to transform 7 different colonial buildings into a very important museum. I would say one of those encyclopedic museums, a museum with several collections. These are the restored now facades. We also have committed to restore the colonial facades of the 7 different buildings and 2 churches to be part of this new sort of like structure of museums, which is one museum. These are some of the existing courtyards that we were able to rescue and redo. And basically, I show these photos because I always saw our task as something like this. It was a completely utilized, super crowded, sort of kind of a museum that was impossible to visit. It was very difficult to navigate. And our task was to bring in a new structure, a new order, a new articulation, and create a new spatial condition for the new museum. So as we couldn't touch anything, we couldn't go up, we couldn't go side, we couldn't change the facades, all we could do is intervene from the inside out. So that was basically the challenge of the project, how to create inside buildings that don't look into the outside, but look into the inside. And how to create with those new places within the museum that would help us articulate this very important institution. It was basically a surgical exercise, an exercise of I always say it was much more important the section than the plans or than the elevations, and that's why I tend to always show a section. And these are part of the new spaces of the museum. This is the new vestibule of the museum, the new lobby, where we needed to bring new light and a new opportunity of organization and a new opportunity of articulation of the different spaces. We brought all the circulations here and all of the signage here. So from here, people can approach all of the different collections that are quite impressive within the museum. And a few photos that show, obviously, you know, the new, I would say, the new building, the transformation of the building. I would say that as we talk about patrimony and conserving patrimony, patrimony is not only important to conserve because of its historical value. Of course, some of the built stock that we have does have some historical value. I know that people are very tied up in Miami about that, but it's not only the historical value. There's also a tremendous value of the materials that have already been utilized, the energy that has already been utilized, the many years that people have lived through these buildings. So the conservation of all of those conditions become very important and very unique for why we should conserve these buildings. And the very important thing to me is that I don't believe there's any building that should just be restored to its original, but every building, because they live much longer than us, has the building or spaces or cities have the opportunity to transform and to look into the future and to accept that relationship between the existing and history and tradition and what comes later. And if we don't give buildings a new opportunity, then the buildings, we will lose those buildings and we will lose that patrimony. We were able to restore some of the galleries. Some of the galleries are new. Again, we see a sort of like a overall view of one of the main spaces. And we can start seeing also how this building relates to to the historic center, which is a UNESCO protected site in our country. And here is what, I like very much this photo because from the beginning, from the competition, what I offered our clients, I said, you have 4 fabulous collections of different types of art, but I think the most important collection is the architecture collection that surrounds you. So we need to find a way to make that collection part of your own collections. And this has become a very important gathering place, the top of the building. People come here. There's a cafeteria, there's galleries here, there's an auditorium that are at the top and are part of this sort of new building that pokes from the center of the colonial buildings and that relates and participates in the discourse of the rest of the cities. And from there, I would go to another big chapter that I have called Territories. Territories because we've had the opportunity, and I think it's a very important possibility for all of us as architects to understand that architecture goes way beyond the buildings we do or go way beyond whatever condition that we do in a very unique and specific manner. And this is just talking about much larger ways of bringing structure and order to different conditions of places. In this case, you know, it was like a master plan, also a competition we won for reorganizing the Rutgers College or Rutgers University in New Jersey, and different master plans that we've been doing where we really sort of start to understand and creating smaller cities. In this case, is the utilizing of the land of the old airport in Mérida, Yucatan, and how we could weave this tremendous amount of wealth that is going to be left open right in the center of the city and bring back bring back the people to live right in the center of the city instead of just letting that very, very nice city, as a matter of fact, grow indiscriminately and organically as it has been happening. And I will just share with you, this is a master plan that we've been working also for many years. And it's very important because it deals really with a new sort of organization and a new sort of articulation for I consider one of the greatest cities in the world, which is Mexico City. But it's also one of the biggest cities in the world. And it's one of the most complex cities in the world and most complicated cities in the world, where 25 million of us share that common space. And obviously has many of the issues that many cities have. And our task has been, with a big team, obviously, but we have been working on this for many years already, on how to create a new structure that can be overlapped or overimposed to the existing historic structures of the city and create a new condition both of mobility or better conditions of life for the whole city. This is just a plan that shows sort of like a very simplistic way of understanding many of the systems of transportation within Mexico City. But we have based, or our team has based this project in understanding that Mexico City is not anymore this sort of conglomerate of little cities as it has been for many centuries, but it has become a much more complex of nodes where the different modes of transportation sort of intersect and meet and create these new opportunities. And by articulating all of those very important nodes that have sort of happened in an organic way, we allow the city to create a new structure, completely new structure that can be read independently both the historic and the political sort of structure that the city has and that it has been trying to attach to, and that has been holding up the city into a really complicated situation. So what I believe is that the city is like the human body, where this sort of like very complex condition of arteries and veins and nerves sort of go through it, but they do meet in certain places. There are certain moments that become super important, and those are the moments that need to be identified, need to be organized, and they need to be all articulated in a way to give the city sort of like a better fluidity and a better continuity. And that's basically what this project has been about. We've been working with the city in understanding the whole city project, which is a very challenging but a very interesting way of looking at architecture from a very, very large scale. And in this case, we are also in charge of one of those centers, one of those, there are like nine or between 9 and 12 important centers that need to be transformed and need to become like seeds of a new sort of development. First, and two things happen here. One is where all the public transportation meets, which is obviously very messy. In our case, we have 3 lines of subway, a new line of a new intercity train coming here, many lines of buses, taxis, and now different platforms, et cetera, et cetera. So first of all, we were commissioned to design the new sort of transport hub, the new transport center that articulates all of those lines, and then to create sort of like a new datum of the city that would start with a sort of like a new seed of development around which this part of the city should start and will start growing. This is just an animation of the many different layers and the complexities of a project like this, which eventually ends up being sort of like the initiation of both a transportation hub, a working hub, a retail place, some housing, and very importantly in this case was also the recuperation of a small lake that used to exist there, and that it's super important to have it as it's part of the system that allows that prevents flooding to this part of the city. So because of the topography, all of the lower part had been filled with the transportation hub, a very complex transportation hub. I would be happy in another occasion to share with you how complex all of this is. And that would create sort of new public space for the city, or for this heart of the city, that would allow the city to start growing, or at least this part of the city to start growing around those spaces that would then start sort of radiating as other people and other initiatives start building around this place. So this is one of the sort of like hubs that we are in charge of, that started from an infrastructure condition, and then is becoming now a development condition. So it's the city working with it, all the different agencies that deal with transportation in the city, and then now several developers that are jumping into participating with the city in creating this first seed that will start irradiating into the rest of this neighborhood. And by doing this, I should say that now we're involved in a much larger territory, which basically includes our whole country. And for many years, until 100 years ago, until the birth or the coming of the car, Mexico was pretty well connected by a system of rails, of trains, that we basically lost them. now the intention now is to reconnect and first to understand and recover, obviously, the opportunities that we still have left, both architectural and urban, from those times, but also to reconnect again the whole country with a new system of rails and public transportation, which is, again, an amazing and fascinating project of infrastructure that I strongly believe that gives architecture a great opportunity. I should also say, I've always been sort of like arguing that we as architects have left many voids in our profession by not attending many of the topics, and we have given up those topics to other disciplines. And it's very important that we as architects come back and start recuperating those great opportunities. I know that many of you here come from different countries in Latin America, and all of our countries are growing in that direction. It's super important, and the opportunities are enormous. So I encourage you, all of you, to look and to get ready and to get prepared, because that is going to happen. These are some train stations that we have designed and built. In this case, one that is being finished in Mexico City, that it's the terminal station for a train that connects Mexico City with the city of Toluca. We have designed several of the cities, and in this case we're just about to finish up the big train station in Cancun, in the Yucatan Peninsula, in Quintana Roo. It's not finished yet, but these are already some photos of the station itself. I will take 10 more minutes and I will be done. Another thing that has been very close to my heart, and that's why I've sort of leave it a little bit at the end, is culture and education. I have been a teacher myself. I've been dedicated to academia all of my life. I would say I've never left the university. The moment I graduated as a student, I started teaching at a university, and I'm very, very committed both to academia and in general to culture. And that has brought me close and given us the opportunity to dedicate part of our practice to the design and invention or creation of different places for those topics. It's been going on for several years. These are buildings from the 90s that we did in Mexico City, a project that we won for the Guggenheim Museum that unfortunately didn't happen. This is a park of culture and several spaces, cultural spaces outside of Mexico City as well. In this case, is part of this is the School of Business at Rutgers University in New Jersey, where we were also we did the design, and we've worked for several of the public libraries in the States. In this case, is the New York Public Library on 53rd Street, across from the Museum of Modern Art. We've also worked in Washington for libraries and in the Brooklyn system for libraries. And this is a university, a campus, a very urban campus in Mexico City called Centro, dedicated both to the arts and to the different disciplines of design. A museum that unfortunately will not be built in Chapultepec Park in Mexico City. And I will share very briefly with you a project that we just presented last weekend in Long Beach, California, which is a new museum. It's a museum of Latin American art. And for that reason, I also think it's quite important to all of these sort of, I would say, a necklace of Latin American cities that form the southern part of the United States. Long Beach is part of Los Angeles, although it's a different city, but it's really part of metropolitan Los Angeles, the largest port in the West Coast. And it houses, or it's the site of a museum that was created about 80 years ago called the MOLA, or Museum of Latin American Art, located right in the center of the urban texture of Long Beach. It's a building that unfortunately has not aged very well, and we've had the opportunity, we won it in an international competition, to propose the substitution of this new building for a totally different building, for a very different campus of buildings. That's what we proposed. The difference is that I believe that still many of our institutions, many of our cultural institutions are still looking to create these sort of big expressionist buildings, a big one building. What we propose to them is that instead of creating a building, we would create really a small village, a village of culture that would house the different activities and that would allow the community and the visitors to the community to gather here and to discover here both the opportunities of education and the arts. We also were obliged, I would say, to say that for other two reasons. One is that we only had the opportunity to be, the only site we had is the site that is already occupied by the current museum. And one of the conditions was the museum would never stop operating while the construction of this new venue would occur. Therefore, we had to create a plan that would allow us to substitute piece by piece, until we completed the whole village. And the proposal is that the village is a collection of both built space and open spaces, where all of them are opportunities for learning, for art, and for culture. Meaning that also the squares, the patios, the plazas are also galleries, but also the galleries are public spaces. And again, a museum that would be totally transparent to the community, welcoming to the community, open to a community that where many, I would say 60% of the people that live in Long Beach are from Hispanic descent, and many of them are only first or second generation in the United States. And having a museum is obviously a condition of great pride, but it's also an obligation to these communities. So we created a project, or we proposed a project that would be a series of buildings and spaces of mass and void that would be done in a certain period of time, and where every one of the pieces that would be completed would be a finished condition. It will never be sort of like something that would be happening that would be incomplete. We went back to understanding the opportunities of both modern architecture and architecture in Latin America. And we proposed to them this sort of plan where we would start by building the first piece, and then we would move people into the first piece, and then we would be able to demolish the site for the second piece, build that second piece, move people and art to that second piece, and so forth, until after 4 or 5 stages, we would complete the whole village, and the museum would be completed as we can see it. That was presented last Saturday. I was in California. It was, I believe, very well accepted. In this case, instead of having, as you saw before, these sort of very closed walls to the city, here they're completely transparent, open. People can see all the different layers of both built spaces and open spaces, always in relationship with in the interior and the exterior. Some of the pieces have to be built first. We've proposed with them what they call an open storage, where they will be able to, where people will be able to access all of their collection, obviously in an orderly way, but the collection would be absolutely open to the public. There would be really no closed storages. All new galleries, the plazas or the patios become galleries themselves. The circulation is clear and strong. And we're bringing also some of the big traditions of Southern California. In this case, this patio of orange trees, as you may know, California is known in that area for all of these amazing orchards that sort of become part of the enjoyment of the public. And I told the dean that I would show what I'm doing in Miami. So sorry for leaving it at the end. We've been very lucky, and I'm very, very proud to have been working in this fabulous city already for many years. And I hope that we will continue working here in Miami. A lot of the projects that we have done have been mostly residential projects that we have been able to build in different places of Miami Beach. This is in Hollandale, a building that we just finished a couple years ago. And we are now working basically on 3 projects here in Miami. One is it's a residential and retail project in Wynwood, in the new, it's called North Wynwood or something like that. And as you know, the residential projects usually have enormous amount of restrictions. So here was about reinventing the opportunity of some public and cultural space, understanding that sort of like a tradition or at least invented tradition of the murals in Wynwood that now have become sort of like an obliged situation. And we're working on another residential and retail project in Miami Beach that is going up on Washington Avenue. Hopefully it will be going up in Washington Avenue. And I want to finish up with a very small project that we're doing. My partners are here, and I thank you very much for coming. Jackie, Carlos, we're doing it with them. And it's a very small project, but I think a very important project, working with a tremendous group of talented people called Miami New Drama, which is the conversion of an existing very large loft into a series of spaces for creation in music and drama. And also it includes a library and a cafe and a restaurant. And we're hoping that this will go on very soon and will create a new opportunity for gathering and for new activity and new energy in this very important and dear city to myself. And I thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks, Enrique. Do you have a couple moments for a couple questions?
Sure.
Like, you guys know the drill? Who's got a question for the wonderful lecture? Any brave souls out there? Our students, it normally takes them a moment to warm up.
No worries.
Oh.
I didn't realize that we were transmitting.
Okay, I'll read this one on Zoom for you. Your body city analogy reminds me that you were at UPenn when Joseph Reichert was leading the PhD program over 30 years ago. He spoke highly of you, so I would like to ask you if Joseph had an influence on you or your work, and if you would like to say something about him since he passed away last Friday at the age of 98. Thank you in advance. This is from Victor Dupuy, one of our faculty here.
Yeah, that's I would say a big loss. Reichert was obviously one of the big thinkers of our previous generation. I would say he was a big believer in modernism. I had great conversations with him. Of course, I'm sure, like anybody else in my life that I've had the opportunity to interact with has had an influence in our work. I wouldn't be able to say exactly how, but I do obviously remember him as one of my, I would say, big teachers and great colleagues when I was, yes, at the University of Pennsylvania. When I came to the University of Pennsylvania, he was already on his last years. I didn't get to be too many years with him, but still I catched his last few years at the university, and then he left, and then other people came. He would lead basically the theory efforts, or the department, the subjects that dealt with theory of architecture. And obviously, always the discussions with him were lively and intelligent, and it was always a tremendous learning. So yes, we all miss him. And yeah, I'm sorry also about his passing.
Anybody up in the audience? Warming up? Okay.
Enrique, thank you. What do you think makes a good client of an architect?
What
makes a good client of an architect?
That's a very good question. I think, obviously, as I said before, a client is not always a person. It could be an institution, could be a community, could be a city, could be many things. And I think a good client is a well-educated client and a challenging client. Because I strongly believe, and I've always said it, that architecture always takes two parts, the two complementary parts. And when you have somebody challenging, but always in a respectful and educated way, and that somebody doesn't need to be a person, sometimes it's an institution or a city or whatever, that's always the best client, I'd say.
Well, I have a question for you. Thank you again for sharing the amazing range of work. And I'm wondering, I know that practicing across these different scales, you mentioned territories, contexts, cultures. If you have a particularly favorite scale that you like to practice at, and what about, sort of the characteristics of that scale, what makes you like it?
That's a good question. I don't. Many people ask me that. And I really don't. We're working in very small projects, very, very small projects. Like, for example, as we speak, I'm working on a tiny, tiny, tiny pavilion for an artist that we're doing in Ibiza in Spain, which is a tiny studio, little home for a guest home, which is very, very, very small. And at the same time, we're working in huge planning projects that deal with the country, with the whole country. And they all bring incredible challenges, incredible opportunities, design challenges, and I do enjoy them very much. As I said, I started showing some of our residential work because I know that that's what most of us will mostly do during our careers, or that's the majority of the work. And we are careful of never letting that go, of always having in our office those kinds of residential projects of all scales. We're doing projects that are, it could be a one-family residence that can be 20,000 square feet, or we're doing this tiny little pavilion that it's not even maybe 120 square meters or 1,200 square feet. So we deal with all kinds of scales, also in the residential. And then we deal with large, very large institutional buildings, a planning sort of condition. And I really enjoy very much the variety of all of that. And it keeps us alive, and it gives us energy, and it keeps us moving. And I think we are very lucky to be able to have that big array. I should say that I don't believe, and really it bothers me and dislike something that is this sort of specialization that is quite common, especially in countries like this one, that, you know, certain offices specialize in certain types of buildings or certain scales of buildings. For me, I think it's the opposite. You know, the more variety, the more diversity that we have in our lives, and that maybe goes beyond architecture, the better.
All right, maybe one last question.
Thank you for the lecture. I agree that just the range and the quantity of work is just so impressive, and thank you for sharing it with us. So when I introduced you, the first thing I said is acclaimed Mexican architect, Enrique Norten. And when I see the work again, one more time, I'm struck by how the fact of being Mexican in your case is very different from what we know of Mexican architects, who tend to struggle much more with this Mexican identity. What does it mean to be Mexican, North America, but south of the US, being part of the South, and the whole regional preoccupations and the Mexican identity? In your case, what I find very refreshing is that, and I want you to maybe contradict me or elaborate on this, is that you really don't dwell too much on these kind of questions of identity, and you are more of a, like, I think of you as a global practitioner that is not really trying intellectually working through these questions of a regional architecture or being a Mexican architect in terms of identity. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, obviously, you know, through my career, that sort of question dash criticism comes up all the time.
But
I appreciate
the strength, actually.
I appreciate what you're saying very much. And I would say that another thing that I really dislike are stereotypes. So anything that would be stereotyped as whatever, like Mexican architecture or Miami architecture, I think in this time and place and space, it really, it doesn't exist, because there are no borders for ideas. There are no borders for these vocabularies. And I strongly believe that when we do architecture in Mexico, it's very Mexican architecture, because it is the architecture where most of Mexicans, 75% of Mexicans are under 30 years old and are in the internet and are looking into the future and are part of this global world. And they are proud of being part of this global world. And as long as our architecture is sort of responding to cultural conditions, to environmental conditions, to political conditions, and it's also expressing a hope for the future, I am very happy. And yes, I was brought up strongly believing, and I'm still a big believer in the vocabulary of modernism. You know, I believe that modernism did something very beautiful for the world, which is sort of kind of helping us unite the world and understand the world through the arts or through architecture in a sort of very common sort of opportunity. And I think that all of our buildings, or I would hope to think that all of our buildings, our projects, do somehow understand on one hand or stand in this intersection, that I think it's a very important intersection for a generation between the global and the unique, the universal and the specific. And when those two lines meet, I think there's a great opportunity for architecture of the future. And that's where I think our work stands, or that's where I hope our work stands.
All right. Well, thank you very much. If we can all give him a hand.